Buonasera, and thank you, Giovanni, Mr. Vice Minister, distinguished guests, friends. Last night, there were two very important matches took place. One it wasn't my own country, but it was a country close to mine, and the result you know. The other was a calcio storico in Firenze, and it was my quartier, Santo Spiritu, that actually won. So last night was a rather difficult night for me. So if I'm not showing my best today, it's partly due to circumstances. A great pleasure for me from UNICEF to be here in the University of Bocconi. It's another of the research centers throughout the world which is working on social policy. And I think linking the knowledge that we have across the world is going to be one of the features of the future, and it's looking much more from a global perspective. I'd like to, of course, formally add my welcome on behalf of UNICEF, but I'm going to just use my time to merely make just 2 points in framing the discussion on the crisis and philanthropy, if I may. And the first, from a UNICEF perspective particularly, is that it's so important that we should not let the crisis lose some of the crucial gains we've had on policy for children in these recent years. There is a real risk of that. And secondly, there is a real role for philanthropy in the world, in the development landscape, but it has to be strategic and it has to be well thought out, because there is a window of opportunity that might well be closing. The crisis. The crisis has reminded us, it hasn't told us anything new, but it tells us how interconnected the world is. What happens in the United States in the low-cost housing market has implications across Europe, across the world. So that is only just reminding us of the connections that take place between different parts of the world. But there is another element of that seems to be happening, that in this world, as we see the crisis, there seems to be a habit of people saying, and particularly in Europe, that, well, if we ourselves are going through such difficulties, shouldn't we be looking after our own much more? Or should we be thinking also about people in far-off countries, children in far-off countries? I'm sure Thomas will be talking a little bit about that in his presentation. Frankly, there is space to do more for children here in Italy. There is space to do more for children across Europe. And in fact, if those of you who have seen our recent report on child poverty in OECD countries, there are many governments, there is much that could be done with existing resources, much that could be done to be much more effective in strategies. So there is space, policy space, that we have here. But in a broader sense, though, there are some really worrying developments that are happening with the crisis. One is that across Europe, those countries that were doing really well on child poverty reduction are now backing away. They're stalling. The ones which actually demonstrated the right sorts of policy mixes are now actually pulling back investments from that. And that has a global significance because we need good policy practice to show the way. And if it doesn't happen in Europe, then it'll have to happen somewhere else, but we lose that kind of momentum. But secondly, we're also seeing just now we're just gaining the knowledge of how much damage happens to young people, to children, when they experience poverty. There's new developments in human psychology and biology that reminds us that the very early years are the crucial ones, after which you just never recover. And we're seeing that for young people today, but we're also seeing it for children. And thirdly, I think we are clear that behind one crisis, often there are hidden other ones. And at the moment, although we don't see it on the newspaper, prices of food are very high historically across the world, and those weigh heavily on decisions in ordinary families. Fuel prices are high, and if the world economy recovers again, we could be seeing other crises coming together. So the interrelationship between crises and the need to have a systemic approach, very, very crucial. So my argument is, I'm sure Thomas will be saying there is a moral case for working on poverty, but actually it's more than a moral case. It's in the interests of society that we deal with poverty, and certainly when it deals with poverty that affects children. My second point on philanthropy. The development landscape, as many of you will know, is very prominent in where we have philanthropists like Bill Gates, George Soros, and a number of others, really highly significant, working on major new, taking advantage of knowledge and really pushing, injecting new energy into development practice. And that's fine, that's good. But it's not, it gives the impression that only if you're a billionaire can you be a philanthropist. That's not the case. There is a tremendous amount of space for philanthropy to support social change and social transformation. And it's at the micro level often that that's taking place, whether it is NGOs and civil societies working in health, education. These are the places where transformations are possible and where knowledge is needed. And that's where I believe that where philanthropy in a middle ground could also be enormously powerful. And that's where UNICEF is putting its investments, because these bring high leverage for the lives of children as we go on. The other area, which again I would appeal here to many of the philanthropists, are also coming from the business sector. You understand risk, you understand what it means to invest in projects. Well, development also requires risk-taking. It also requires the long view. And at the moment, under the crisis, we are seeing that public sector enterprises are all being forced back into their core business. So there is need for innovation outside that. And that's where I believe that there is, again, a striking need for philanthropy to step in. The third area is those areas which are unpopular. There is always issues which are too sensitive or just never get the public good funding, which includes research. And I would include that as another area that needs philanthropy to come in a big way. In terms of just the next few years, I think we're going to face with a critical period for all of our development efforts. The crisis will continue. Development efforts are under question, even though there has been great achievements in the recent period. And UNICEF actually will be throwing its weight behind a lot of the recent efforts to really accelerate the use of existing knowledge and technologies that are taking place in the world. Since 2003, there have been remarkable achievements in reducing mortality through using existing knowledge. Scaling up malarial bed nets, getting children into school, getting girls to finish schooling. There's been enormous progress, and that will continue. But there's another dimension which is even harder, and that is that the recognition that much of this progress, though, is often at the level of national averages. If you look deeper, there are tremendous disparities in every country, and it's those groups who are left out, and children who are left out or left behind, that become the particular target of UNICEF's work. And our executive director, Anthony Lake, has made equity the theme for UNICEF's major effort in the coming period. But also, it's going to be an issue that will dominate development, I believe, for the next 20 years, because we haven't got solutions to that. And in that way, I think we'll be listening very carefully to what Thomas says about some of the defining the underlying issues that really bring about equity in our modern society. But lastly, I would just like to say, in terms also, though, of for an organization like UNICEF, we need to have policies that have children everywhere, because there is no voice for children in governments. There's often, or where there is, they remain extraordinarily weak. There is no effort in terms of structures that are too weak on behalf of children. So it needs the additional voices from outside. It needs, may I say, gentlemen and ladies, your voice to really make things happen for children. And it will be the effort, it will be the measure of your success, that whether we have actually a world where children, every child, can grow up to their full potential. Whether it should be a girl in Andhra Pradesh in eastern India, a child growing up in Democratic Congo, a Roma child who is in Eastern Europe, or a deprived child growing up here in Italy. They all will be together. Thank you very much.